In the heart of the Ural Mountains, where icy winds howl through endless white valleys, there lies a place the locals once called Kholat, the Mountain of the Dead. It was here, in February 1959, that 9 experienced hikers set out on what was meant to be an adventure of endurance, and ended in one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern history. No one could have imagined that their journey, a test of skill, resilience, and camaraderie, would become the stuff of nightmares. No survivors, no clear answers, only scattered bodies, torn tents, and evidence that defied logic and science. The Dyatlov Pass Incident remains frozen in time, a mystery that has haunted investigators, conspiracy theorists, and truth seekers for over 6 decades. Let's go back to where it began. It's late January, 1959. The Soviet Union is still cloaked in secrecy and suspicion. A group of university students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute are preparing for a Category 3 expedition, the most difficult type, to the remote Otorten mountain. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student, calm under pressure, brilliant in planning. The team, 9 in total, each with experience, each hungry for adventure. They packed skis, food, journals, and cameras, unaware they were also carrying their final memories. They set out with laughter, songs, and confidence. Photographs later found on their cameras showed smiling faces, snowball fights, and the thrill of the challenge ahead. They believed they were in control. But nature, or something else, had other plans. The route would take them through frozen rivers, steep ridges, and desolate wilderness. A place so remote, it was as if the world itself ended there. Locals warned them not to go toward Kholat, the Mountain of the Dead. But Igor and his team were rational minds. They didn't believe in curses, spirits, or folklore. They believed in maps, compasses, and courage. Days later, a blizzard hit. The team was forced off course. They made camp on the eastern slope of the mountain, exposed to fierce winds and blinding snow. From that moment on, they were never seen alive again. Weeks later, when search teams finally found their tent, it was still standing, half buried in snow. Inside, all their gear, food, and shoes untouched. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Tracks led away, barefoot, half-dressed, into the freezing dark. Something had driven 9 trained hikers to flee into the night. Without boots, without coats, and without reason. Whatever happened that night on Kholat, it wasn't ordinary. And the deeper investigators looked, the stranger it became. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Before we explore what happened on that mountain, we must first meet the 9 souls who vanished into the snow. They were young, vibrant, and full of purpose, not thrill seekers, but disciplined adventurers who lived for the challenge of the wilderness. At the center of it all was Igor Dyatlov, just 23 years old. A meticulous engineering student with a mind for precision, Dyatlov was known for his calm leadership and methodical nature. Friends said that if anyone could keep a group safe in the harshest of conditions, it was him. He designed his own camp stoves, carried spare compasses, and made detailed notes on every expedition. Dyatlov believed in logic, not superstition. But logic would fail him on Kholat. Next was Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, lively, stubborn, and fearless. She had hiked through storms, crossed frozen rivers, and never backed down from a challenge. Her diary entries from the journey glow with humor and optimism. One line reads, "If only we could know what lies ahead. We'd laugh even harder tonight." That line now chills every reader who finds it. Then there was Yuri Doroshenko, 21, strong and fiercely loyal. On a previous expedition, he once fought off a bear with a geologist's hammer, earning him the nickname, the Bear. He was a natural protector, the kind of friend who'd volunteer to take the night watch when everyone else slept. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, was the youngest of the group, serious, sharp-witted, and disciplined. She was known for her blunt honesty and strong will. Her diary notes detail minor frustrations, wet clothes, cold weather, aching feet, but also gratitude for the group's unity. It was Dubinina who would later be found in one of the most horrifying conditions of all. Rustem Slobodin, 23, was an athlete, a runner, trained in endurance. He loved the solitude of the wilderness and pushed his limits constantly. He was quiet, introspective, and deeply respected by the group. His body, found later, would show signs that defied explanation. Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 24, was the son of a French engineer who had settled in Russia. He was intelligent, easygoing, and popular, the glue between the team's diverse personalities. Friends remembered his laughter echoing through the snow-covered forests. Alexander Kolovatov, 25, was methodical and analytical. A physics student with an interest in nuclear science, he was the kind of man who took careful notes and questioned everything. In another life, he might have been an investigator himself. Yuri Krivonishenko, 23, the joker of the group, brought levity to every trek. He played the mandolin by the campfire, sang songs, and laughed through hardship. But beneath his humor was something few noticed. He had once worked at the Kishtim nuclear disaster site, where exposure to radiation was common. This detail would later raise disturbing questions. And finally, there was Yuri Yudin, the 10th hiker. He began the journey with them, but turned back early due to a knee injury and illness. It was a twist of fate that saved his life. Decades later, he would say, "If I had known what was coming, I would never have left them." 9 hikers continued on. 9 friends trudged deeper into the wild, their laughter fading into the wind. They didn't know it, but they were walking toward one of history's most chilling enigmas. In the days ahead, their journals would capture the transition from joy to unease, from jokes around a campfire to strange cryptic lines like, "We now know snowmen exist." Those would be the last words ever written by the Dyatlov group. January 25th, 1959. The group arrives at the small Siberian town of Vizhay, the last sign of civilization before the mountains swallow the land. They spend the night in a local hostel, laughing, writing in their diaries, and preparing for the long trek ahead. To them, this was just another challenge, one they would conquer, document, and remember. In a photograph taken that night, the team smiles in a tight circle, their faces flushed from the cold. None of them knew that this would be their final photo together. The next morning, they boarded a truck loaded with supplies and workers heading toward a logging settlement near Ivdel. The truck's engine groaned as it climbed through snow-choked roads, the group singing folk songs to keep spirits high. Locals who met them later recalled their warmth, a group of polite, cheerful students who radiated energy. To them, the cold was an adversary to be respected, not feared. But even then, subtle omens began to surface. When the team reached the settlement of Vizhay, they noticed that the weather was shifting. Winds grew stronger, temperatures dropped. One of the hikers wrote in her journal, "We can feel the frost biting harder now." The locals warn us that Ural Mountain means don't go there. We laughed at first. Now, I'm not sure why. They spent that night planning their route, a detailed path that would take them through the northern Ural Mountains to the peak of Ural. Their destination lay more than 100 kilometers away, through terrain few dared to cross in winter. It was desolate, dangerous, and beautiful. On January 27th, the expedition officially began. The group strapped on their skis, slung heavy packs over their shoulders, and set out into the frozen wilderness. Yuri Yudin, the 10th hiker, struggled with pain from sciatica and a worsening illness. By the next day, he made the difficult decision to turn back, hugging each of his friends before heading home. It would be the last time he ever saw them alive. In their diaries, the remaining 9 described the landscape with wonder and fatigue. Everything is covered in snow, endless white. Trees bend under the weight. Our hands are numb, but spirits are high. The wind howls like a beast at night. We can barely sleep, but we sing songs to keep warm. They joked, cooked, photographed one another, and even celebrated a mock government meeting in the tent, a satire of Soviet bureaucracy. They were still laughing, but on January 31st, the tone shifted. The weather worsened. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Blizzards struck from every direction. Their progress slowed to a crawl, and they began to lose their bearings. In his final diary entry, Dyatlov wrote, "We are forced to make camp on the slope. Too tired to continue. Visibility is poor. No other option." That slope was the eastern face of Kholat Shakhl, the mountain of the dead. It's unclear why they didn't move downhill to the forested area below, which would have offered more shelter. Perhaps Dyatlov wanted to stay above the tree line to maintain their direction. Perhaps he feared losing progress. Or perhaps Something made them stop there. As the snow fell thicker and the temperature plunged below -25°C, the team pitched their tent on the barren slope, unaware that this would be their final night together. Inside, they cooked a simple meal of stew and biscuits, wrote in their journals, and took one last photograph, blurry, dimly lit, showing a face half covered by shadows and snow. Some say it was Dyatlov. Others claim it wasn't anyone from the group at all. Hours later, something happened. Something powerful enough to drive 9 trained hikers out of their tent into the night. Barefoot, half-clothed, and terrified. What could make them run? It is now February 1st, 1959, the final day the 9 hikers would ever see. The wind screamed across the white emptiness of the Ural slopes. Snow whipped through the air, blotting out the horizon. The mountain loomed ahead, silent, indifferent, ancient. Inside their tent, half buried in snow, the Dyatlov group huddled together, sharing warmth and nervous laughter. Outside, the temperature hovered near -30°C. They had made it far, farther than most would ever dare. But nature had turned hostile. The storm that night was relentless, the kind that stripped the world of all sound but the howling wind. Through their cameras and diaries, we catch brief glimpses of that final day. Photographs show the group trudging through deep snow, their faces half covered by scarves and frost. One of the final photos, hauntingly blurred, shows a mysterious figure standing among the trees, far behind the group. Some say it was just one of the hikers. Others whisper it was something else watching them. That evening, they made their last camp on the eastern slope of Kolat, a barren stretch of snow with no natural shelter. No one knows exactly why they stopped there instead of descending into the forest just a kilometer below, where they could have built a fire. Perhaps exhaustion, perhaps poor visibility, or perhaps they didn't want to go into the forest. At around 9 p.m., the team ate dinner, a simple meal of tinned meat, biscuits, and tea. Their diaries ended that night with calm, routine notes. Nothing strange, nothing fearful. Just ordinary thoughts from extraordinary people, unaware of what was coming. Sometime in the hours that followed, the nightmare began. Searchers would later find that the tent had been cut open from the inside, as if the hikers had clawed their way out in panic. 9 sets of footprints led away, barefoot, socked, or wearing only one shoe, weaving down the slope toward the dark line of trees in the distance. No signs of a struggle, no avalanche debris, no tracks of anyone else. It was as though something terrified them so completely. They fled into the frozen wilderness without a second thought, abandoning food, boots, coats, and safety. Those footprints stretched nearly half a kilometer before disappearing into the snow. What made them run? There were no signs of an avalanche, no animal tracks, no indication of human attackers. And yet, something powerful enough to induce pure, instinctive fear had struck that night. The search teams who arrived weeks later could only imagine what those final minutes were like. The bitter cold searing their lungs, the snow biting at their skin, the darkness pressing in from all sides. The mountain offered no mercy. The wind erased every sound but its own. In the distance, the line of trees stood like black, silhouettes against the white, silent witnesses to what happened next. The next morning never came for the Dyatlov group. It would take weeks before rescuers would even begin to uncover the truth, or at least fragments of it, and what they found would haunt the world for generations. February 26, 1959, almost a month since the Dyatlov group had vanished. The search teams, made up of students, mountaineers, and soldiers, scoured the Ural wilderness under orders from the Soviet government. For days there was nothing, no signal, no tracks, just the endless snow and the silence of the mountains. Then, one of the searchers spotted something strange sticking out of the snow, a torn piece of canvas flapping in the wind. The tent. It was half collapsed, buried under several inches of snow. Inside, time had frozen. The hikers' belongings lay neatly arranged, boots, coats, diaries, and cameras untouched. Plates of uneaten food. A stove that had never been lit. But what chilled investigators most was how the tent had been cut open from the inside, with long, desperate slashes. It was as if the group had crawled out in a panic. There were no signs of an avalanche, no large snowdrifts nearby, and yet they had fled, barefoot, half naked into temperatures below -25°C. 9 sets of footprints led downhill toward the forest. The search team followed. After about 500 meters, the prints began to fade. The wind had erased much of the trail, but they could still see that the hikers had moved calmly at first. Not running, but walking. Almost as if they were being careful. Or resigned. Then, near the edge of the forest, one of the searchers shouted. Under a large cedar tree, the snow concealed 2 bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, lying side by side, barefoot, wearing only their underwear. Their hands were burned. The bark above them was torn with claw marks, as if they had tried to climb the tree in terror, perhaps to see something, or escape something. Beneath the tree was the remains of a small fire that had burned down to ash. The scene was both tragic and horrifying. Nearby branches were snapped several meters high, suggesting that something, or someone, had forced them upward. Their skin was discolored, their faces frozen in grimaces of pain. It was clear they had fought to survive, even as the cold consumed them. Following the direction of faint tracks, the search team found 3 more bodies halfway between the cedar and the tent: Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. They seemed to be trying to return to the tent when they died. Dyatlov's body was facing uphill, his fists clenched. Zenaida had fallen only a few hundred meters behind him. Rustam Slobodin's skull showed a small fracture, not enough to kill instantly, but strange, given there were no external wounds. It was as if the damage came from within. 5 bodies recovered. 4 still missing. The searchers built a makeshift camp near the site. At night, they reported hearing the wind howl through the trees, a low, mournful sound that seemed almost alive. One rescuer later wrote, "The mountain felt different, heavy, like it was watching us." Weeks passed before the remaining 4 bodies were found, hidden beneath meters of snow in a nearby ravine. But what was revealed there would turn this tragedy into one of the most disturbing mysteries in human history. Their injuries made no sense, and they told a story that no one could explain. April 1959, the snow had begun to melt in the Ural Mountains. It had been more than 2 months since the Dyatlov group vanished. 5 bodies had already been found, but 4 were still missing, somewhere out there, beneath tons of ice and snow. Searchers combed the forest near the cedar tree again, probing deeper into the ravine nearby. And then, on May 4th, they found them. Buried beneath 4 meters of snow, the last 4 hikers lay together. Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. But what stunned everyone wasn't how they were found. It was the state they were in. Unlike the first 5, these bodies were better dressed, wearing fragments of clothing that clearly belonged to their dead companions. Someone had tried to stay warm using what they could find, but that detail faded in importance once the medical reports came in. Nikolai's skull was shattered, multiple fractures as if struck by an enormous force. Yet his skin showed no external wounds. Dubinina, the youngest, only 20, had her ribs crushed, her eyes missing, and her tongue completely gone. Zolotaryov, the oldest of the group, had 5 broken ribs and a massive chest wound similar to the impact of a car crash. Kolovatov's injuries were less severe, but his neck was twisted unnaturally, and his clothes contained traces of radiation. The doctors could not explain it. There were no cuts, no signs of struggle, no evidence of human attack. The immense pressure needed to cause such internal damage could not have come from a fall on snow. And yet, somehow it had happened. Investigators pieced together a grim sequence. The group fled the tent in panic, gathered under the cedar tree to light a fire, then split up, some heading back to the tent, others deeper into the ravine seeking shelter. There perhaps they fell, or something else found them. The snow had preserved their faces, expressions of terror frozen in time. When rescuers lifted them out, a faint orange tint was visible on their skin, almost as if burned or chemically stained. Under UV light, their clothes glowed faintly. Geiger counters confirmed the impossible: radiation. Not enough to kill instantly, but enough to raise questions no one could answer. Soviet officials ordered the case closed within weeks. The final report concluded that the hikers had died from a compelling natural force. No explanation. No accountability. Just that, a compelling force. But whispers spread quickly. Witnesses in nearby villages spoke of strange orange lights in the sky the night of the tragedy, lights that moved silently, hovering over the mountains. Military activity was rumored in the area. Some even claimed to have found burn marks on the trees near the tent site. Something had happened on that mountain, something powerful, violent, and deeply unnatural. But the more the government investigated, the deeper the mystery became. Files were sealed, witnesses silenced, and for years even mentioning the Dyatlov Pass Incident was dangerous. Only the dead could speak, and they spoke through the evidence. Crushed ribs, missing eyes, burned skin, radiation, a tent sliced open from the inside. Whatever force killed them, it was no simple storm. Narration tone, clinical yet unnerving. Documentary style with restrained horror. The investigation into the Dyatlov Pass tragedy officially began in early March 1959, even before the last 4 bodies were found. But by the time the autopsies were completed, the case had taken a turn from tragic to terrifying. The forensic doctors who examined the hikers were veterans, men accustomed to death, to exposure, to the predictable effects of hypothermia. But what they saw on these 9 bodies didn't fit any pattern they knew. The first 5, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Slobodin, Doroshenko, and Krivonashenko, showed signs of exposure, frostbite, cracked skin, frozen limbs. But there were details that defied logic. Doroshenko's hair had turned gray-white, as if aged overnight. Krivonashenko's hands were burned to the bone, and human skin was found between his teeth, suggesting he had bitten himself in agony. Slobodin's skull had a fracture consistent with a massive blunt force, but there were no external bruises, no bleeding, no sign of impact on the skin. Dyatlov, the leader, had a broken nose, an open wound on his face, and clenched fists filled with snow, as though he had died fighting. Zenaida's body was found with multiple bruises and a long, defensive wound on her hand, perhaps from shielding herself. And all of them, all 5, were barefoot, dressed only in underclothes, scattered in positions suggesting chaos and confusion. Hypothermia could explain the exposure, but not the injuries, not the missing body parts, not the internal trauma. Then came the second set of autopsies, on the 4 bodies found later in the ravine. And with them came true horror. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20 years old. Her ribs were shattered, her chest caved in as though hit by an explosion. Her eyes were gone and her tongue was missing. Her mouth showed no sign of animal attack. The tissue had been cleanly removed, almost surgically. The doctor noted something chilling. The diaphragm and ribs collapsed inward from great pressure, as if struck by a blast wave. Semyon Zolotaryov had the same pattern of internal injuries, crushed ribs, broken bones, but no surface damage. He was found clutching a notebook in one frozen hand, though it was too waterlogged to read. Thibaut Brignol's skull fracture was compared to that of a high-speed car crash. Kolovatov showed no visible trauma, but his body was in a strange pose. His head tilted back, neck twisted unnaturally, as though caught mid-turn. Then came the strangest discovery: radiation. Tests on their clothes revealed unusually high levels of radioactive contamination, especially on Dubinina and Kolovatov. Traces of thorium and potassium-40 were detected, materials associated with radioactive compounds. The Soviet authorities sealed those findings almost immediately. When asked about the source, one of the lead investigators, Lev Ivanov, later admitted in a secret interview, "We were forbidden from discussing radiation. The order came from above." And yet, even beyond the science, there was something else, something the doctors could feel but not measure. They described an unusual orange-brown pigmentation on the hiker's skin, almost like they had been exposed to high levels of heat or light. Their eyes, in some cases, had dark burnt edges, not frostbite, but something akin to flash burns. One of the pathologists refused to continue after examining the 4th body. He requested to be reassigned, saying only, these were not normal deaths. The official conclusion, hastily issued weeks later, stated that the hikers died from a compelling natural force. No further detail. No names, no speculation. The files were sealed, and the area around Dyatlov Pass was declared off-limits for years. But the silence spoke louder than words. Whatever happened on that mountain, the crushing force, the radiation, the fear that drove them into the snow, It wasn't an accident. And it wasn't natural. In the shadows of the Soviet Union, rumors began to spread. And soon, theories emerged of secret military experiments, sound weapons, or something not of this earth. When the official report called it a death caused by a compelling natural force, the Soviet public was left confused and suspicious. No one understood what that meant. Not the families, not the searchers, not even the investigators themselves. But behind the veil of secrecy, whispers began to grow, theories that tried to explain the unexplainable. Let's begin with the most logical ones, if logic can even exist here. First, the avalanche. Theory for years, the simplest explanation was that the hikers fled their tent because of a sudden avalanche. Perhaps the slope above them gave way, forcing them to slice their tent open and escape into the night. At first glance, it seemed plausible, but the evidence doesn't agree. The slope they camped on was too shallow, only about 15 degrees, not steep enough to trigger an avalanche. There were no signs of snow displacement, no debris trail, no compressed layer of snow beneath the tent when it was found. Even their belongings, a stove, boots, and food, were still neatly arranged inside, untouched by any slide. An avalanche would have swept everything away, and it certainly wouldn't have caused crushed ribs and skulls without leaving a single external wound. Still, decades later, a modified version, a slab avalanche, resurfaced, suggesting a delayed snow shift under their tent. But even then, it fails to explain why the group fled half-dressed, why they walked calmly instead of running, and why radiation was found on their clothes. The avalanche theory solves some of the puzzle, but leaves most of it in pieces. Second, the infrasound theory, another. Idea emerged years later from researcher Donnie Ikar that powerful infrasound waves triggered panic among the hikers. Under rare wind conditions, the mountain's shape could produce low-frequency sound waves, vibrations just below the range of human hearing. Such waves can cause dizziness, nausea, and overwhelming fear, even hallucinations. In panic, the hikers might have fled into the night, confused and terrified, tearing their tent open from the inside. It's hauntingly poetic, the idea of sound itself driving people to madness. But it too has cracks. Infrasound can cause unease, but not the massive blunt trauma or radiation burns found on the bodies. And even if panic made them flee, why didn't any of them return once the fear passed? They were experienced hikers. They would have known death awaited in the cold. So what stopped them from coming back? Third, the military test theory. Then came the theory that made the most sense and scared the most people. In the late 1950s, the Soviet military was secretly testing parachute mines and radiation weapons in remote areas, and including the Urals. Witnesses in nearby towns reported bright orange spheres in the sky the very night the hikers died. The injuries, crushed ribs, missing eyes, internal trauma, matched what one would expect from a shockwave explosion that leaves no surface burns. Dubinina's tongue and eyes could have been destroyed by high heat or pressure. And the radioactive contamination on their clothes suddenly made sense. Even the tent itself told a strange story. No burns, but small holes in the canvas, possibly caused by falling hot debris or fragments. The Soviet authorities' behavior only deepened suspicion. They sealed the area, classified the reports, and closed the investigation abruptly, citing no foul play. Lid investigator Lev Ivanov, decades later, confessed in an interview, "We were ordered to stop. I saw strange lights myself. I was told to forget what I'd seen." To many, that statement confirmed what families had believed all along, that the Dyatlov group had accidentally stumbled into a top-secret military test and paid for it with their lives. Perhaps they saw something they weren't meant to see. Perhaps the sky itself turned against them that night. The avalanche may explain the snow. The infrasound may explain the fear. The military theory may explain the violence and secrecy. But none can explain everything. Something deeper was at play. Something that even science and politics couldn't fully capture. And that's where the story begins to drift into the unknown. When the rational failed, people turned to the irrational. And perhaps on that cursed mountain, the irrational was closer to the truth. The place itself, Kholat Shakhl, the mountain of the dead, was feared by the local Mansi tribe long before 1959. They avoided it, calling it a realm of wandering spirits. To them, the mountain wasn't just barren, it was alive and angry. So when 9 young hikers vanished and were found mutilated and barefoot in the snow, the Mansi weren't surprised. They simply said, "The mountain took them." And in the strange stillness of the Urals, it's hard to argue. First, the Mansi curse. The first whispers blamed the Mansi people themselves. Perhaps some said the hikers had trespassed on sacred land. Maybe they had angered the gods of the north or violated a taboo. But there were no signs of struggle. No footprints but their own, no weapons, no blood trails. Even investigators noted the Mansi were peaceful reindeer herders, not killers. Yet one unsettling discovery remained. The hikers' campsite was near a series of ancient markings carved into the rocks, and Mansi prayer symbols were found not far away. Coincidence? Or were the hikers drawn to something they didn't understand? Second, the Yeti theory. Then came a theory that turned the tragedy into pure nightmare. In one of the hikers' cameras, a photo surfaced. A blurry figure, dark and broad-shouldered, standing among the trees behind the group. Its outline was unmistakably human, yet not. Many believe this final photograph shows a creature watching them, a wild man, a Yeti, or something else entirely. The injuries, some argued, were consistent with a powerful, inhuman attack. Ribs shattered, skulls crushed, bodies flung as if by massive force. Could something have followed them down from the mountain? Could it have driven them out of the tent, one by one, into the freezing dark? Even Russian newspapers at the time fueled the myth, calling it "The Snowman Kills 9." Authorities quickly censored the headlines. But the legend had already escaped. Third, the UFO connection, and then the skies. Multiple witnesses across the Urals reported glowing orange orbs floating in formation that night. Some claimed the light lingered for minutes, silently moving across the clouds. Others saw flashes, bursts of illumination strong enough to cast shadows on the snow. Investigators, too, noted these fireballs, but their reports were classified. The theory grew. What if the hikers encountered something not of this earth? The burns on their skin, the radiation, the fear, all began to align. Perhaps they had seen a craft descending. Perhaps their panic wasn't madness, but awe. And what followed was an accident, or an abduction gone wrong. Even years later, former military officers admitted they'd been ordered to retrieve strange metallic fragments near the pass. No records of those objects were ever released. No one knows where they went. Fourth, a tear in reality. For some, none of the physical explanations, natural, military, or alien, felt sufficient. There's another idea whispered only in late-night forums and half-forgotten documentaries, that maybe something else opened that night. A doorway, a slip between worlds. The tent, after all, was sliced open from within. The hikers fled without boots, without coats, as if they were escaping something inside with them. Some witnesses claimed the corpses looked aged, their hair gray, their skin strangely discolored, as if they had crossed time itself. No proof, no evidence, just fear and silence. More than 60 years later, Dyatlov Pass remains a graveyard of unanswered questions. Each theory, logical or insane, touches only part of the truth, and maybe that's because what happened there wasn't meant to be understood at all. The snow still covers their final campsite. The wind still howls the same lonely song, and every winter, travelers who pass through Kolat swear they hear faint cries carried on the wind. 9 voices, calling for help that never came. Narration tone, reflective, somber, with an undercurrent of cold dread. When the Dyatlov Pass investigation officially closed in May 1959, the world was told only this: the hikers died due to an unknown compelling force. No one was satisfied with that answer. Not the families, not the investigators, not even the Soviet people. But in the USSR, questions could be dangerous, and so the truth was buried under snow and silence. First, the official cover-up. The hikers' bodies were released quietly to their families, with warnings not to speak publicly. Open casket funerals were discouraged. Still, thousands came to mourn in silence, staring at the strange, discolored faces of the dead. Some swore they saw orange burns on the skin, as if from radiation. Others said the bodies looked older, their hair tinged with gray. Rumors spread quickly. about military interference, secret experiments, even alien contact. But the KGB was watching. People who spoke too freely were questioned. Reporters who pushed for answers had their articles censored or pulled. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov was reassigned and later admitted, "We were told to close the case. I was forced to remove evidence from the files." Second, the silence that followed. For decades, the Dyatlov Pass remained off limits. No one dared to go back. Not hikers, not locals, not even soldiers. The Mansi still called it the Mountain of the Dead, and after 1959, no one argued. The families lived in quiet torment. Some mothers refused to believe their children were gone, insisting the government had taken them. Others believed the hikers had discovered something they weren't supposed to, something so secret that it had to be erased. In the years that followed, survivors of other expeditions reported strange things near the pass, compasses spinning wildly, lights dancing in the fog, and whispers in the snow. Third, rediscovery and obsession. When the Soviet Union fell, the Dyatlov files were finally declassified. But what they revealed only deepened the mystery. Pages were missing, photos were torn out, autopsy reports were incomplete. Even the coordinates of the campsite had been altered. Then came the internet age. The Dyatlov Pass Incident became one of the most studied unsolved mysteries in modern history. Researchers, physicists, mountaineers, even horror filmmakers tried to piece together the puzzle. Documentaries were made, books published, new theories surfaced every few years, from secret weapon tests to paradoxical physics, from UFO crashes to sonic phenomena. But every theory, no matter how elaborate, seems to dissolve in the cold wind that still sweeps across that mountain. Fourth, modern investigations in 2019. The Russian government reopened the case, 60 years later. This time they claimed to use modern forensic science. Their conclusion? An avalanche. Again. But when journalists pressed for evidence, the officials hesitated. Satellite photos were missing. The tent reconstruction didn't match the real angle of the slope. And once again, the files were sealed soon after, even today. In 2025, researchers revisit the Dyatlov Pass with new instruments, thermal scanners, radar, drones, searching for anything the snow might have hidden. Some find nothing. Others claim to hear something they can't explain. A low hum in the air, like distant thunder that never stops. Fifth, the legacy of fear. The Dyatlov Pass Incident isn't just a mystery anymore. It's become legend, a warning carved into the heart of the Urals, a story passed between hikers around campfires and whispered in the dark. Each year, a few brave souls make the trek to that lonely slope. Some go to honor the dead, some go seeking truth, but many return saying the same thing, that the place feels wrong, that even on calm days the air seems to hum, as if the mountain itself remembers, and maybe it does. The snow still hides their tent. The trees still mark where their bodies fell. The wind still carries the name Dyatlov, and every time it howls across that ridge, it seems to ask the same question the world still can't answer. What really happened on the Mountain of the Dead? We may never know. But the echoes of that night, the screams, the fear, the silence, still linger in the frost, waiting for someone brave, or foolish, enough to listen.